Good evening,
Hi, everybody.
guys. How is everybody doing tonight? We're excited to be back.
We are. Welcome to AI Live. Just lots of stuff happening around Christmas, New Year's, and everything. We're so busy, but we're so glad to be back with you guys. We're getting a bigger and bigger audience all the time, and we have a great subject for tonight.
Yes, we do.
So
that'll be in a little bit. So, how was your Christmas and
it was, it was quiet.
Yeah,
like we had nobody over, so it was very, very quiet. And then New Year's, nothing. But then my husband ended up getting sick. He ended up getting COVID. So
yay!
Yeah. So I ended up locking him upstairs. I said the prince is locked upstairs in the tower, and
so
I live downstairs.
Little maidservant.
But I know in a while, like we're going to be having a wellness AI that's going to be more wellness oriented in a while.
Next one.
So when he was ill, of course, we all know all the stuff that we want to do for, we have the hydroxychloroquine, we've got the steroids, we've got the azithromycin, we've got ivermectin, all that stuff. Well, when he started getting not feeling very well, like getting a little short of breath, which he didn't really tell me.
Of course, welcome to what guys do.
Yeah, so I called a friend of mine. You know what? And we ended up giving him the stem cells.
Yeah.
And within 24 hours, he was not short of breath anymore. So those stem cells, I tell you, they're magic. And I wish more people had access to exosomes and to stem cells. And there's a lot of clinical studies going on now.
Yeah, the company that I get them from is already starting their phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials for COVID. So excited to see that there are some progression into this field of wellness and regenerative medicine. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at our next AI Live. But that's a really cool one. Glutathione definitely
was
is
a big one.
Another new one that one of my pharmacists has created. Super antioxidant, super detoxer. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But lots of wellness things,
So our next AI Live, I think in March 2nd.
Yeah, March 2nd.
We're going to be bringing a lot of wellness stuff to it. So we're going to have like the CBD, the glutathione, the exosomes, a lot of really cool stuff that's newer.
So if you guys have questions, send them to us at Learn at the Aesthetic Immersion so that we can kind of address it during our little session, our little Q&A session, and just chit-chatting. I mean, I think it's important to talk about wellness, coming out of 2020 with COVID and everything like that. I think people's mindsets have kind of changed a little bit, and we're focusing a little bit more on wellness, being healthy.
You know what? I think our priorities have changed. I think that a reset button has been pushed. I always say God pushed the reset button on the world with this whole COVID thing. And I think that we really have reprioritized, and we've really realized we've spent more time with our families. We've cooked more at home. We have more food in our refrigerator now. But I mean, I think that it's really neat. I think it's really brought us back around and kind of made us reprioritize and be thankful for what we have and thankful for our friends. And we've seen some friends not survive this, and it's been a real eye-opener for us.
Definitely an eye-opener. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
We'll talk more.
So what about your Christmas? What did you do?
We wanted to get out, so we ended up going to Vegas. As always, we ended up going to Vegas. Nice and close for us in Southern California. At least they had the restaurants that were a little bit open. And then we flew up so that my nephew and could go skiing. So we went up to Park City for a couple days. So
he's just a little guy.
Yes, he just turned 6, going on like 18.
He's really smart.
Yeah, he is. A little too opinionated now.
He's a smart kid.
But it was good. It was nice just to get out a little bit and out and about and some semblance of life-ish. Yeah. So it was good. It was nice and chill. I kind of chilled a little bit more so.
Love the snow. Love the snow and mountains.
I know. We finally got our rainstorm here in California.
Oh, rain. We love rain. We never have rain in California, but finally we got some rain. So, I love it. It's awesome.
We'll see how the mountains turn out.
The only thing we worry about in the rain is the people who don't know how to drive in the rain. It sprinkles in California, and the people are just sliding everywhere. You're like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
That is us.
Yeah.
Because we're impatient people.
Right. Welcome to California.
All right. So little housekeeping themes. Yeah. So our AI Live next month, the Tuesday, as always, March 2nd is going to be on wellness. So if you guys have any questions that you want to bring up and things like that, send it to us ahead of time so we can start to address that during our little talk show.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. And after that we're going to be doing a webinar actually on dermal fillers versus PDO threads on the 16th of this month. So it's going to be a live webinar, and it's on the 16th of this month. We're going to kind of look at the threads versus fillers. When do you do threads? When do you do fillers? When do you do both? How do you assess people for these things?
Yep.
So it'll be kind of a fun webinar if you guys enjoy doing either one, or kind of go, wow, what is this patient better
thinking
for?
About it. And a lot of people are like, they're sitting back waiting. Is threads really that useful? The hope is that it'll broaden your mind. I think threads are definitely here to stay.
Oh, yeah.
And definitely you guys need to jump on the bandwagon and learn it, because I think it addresses something that fillers can't address, and fillers address things that threads can't address. And so we'll go over that at that webinar. So look out for that February 16th. Next after that is our webinar in March. It's going to be on March 16th. I'm going to be talking on noses. We're going to do hopefully either fillers or threads on the nose. So we'll talk about redefining the nose, kind of helping you assess the nose and how to inject the nose, hopefully more safely, and to definitely with threads even safer than your fillers. So we're going to play around with that. So check out our webinar March 16th on redefining noses.
And then we also have coming up, we have what we call FOA and FOAD. It's Foundations of Advanced Aesthetics and Foundations of Aesthetics for Dentists. So we call it FOA and FOAD. Those two courses, both are online. There's modules online that you have to take before you come here to the hands-on to do hands-on with us. So
12 hours.
There's a good there's probably 10 to 12 hours of modules that you take. There's about 19 modules that you take them in your own time and finish those. You learn so much about medical aesthetics. You learn about anatomy. You learn about rheology, which we're talking about tonight. You learn so much about medical aesthetics that probably nobody's ever taught you before. You take some post-tests in there, and then that allows you to come to the hands-on here in California with one of us. Now, when we do the hands-on clinical education, we are one-on-one with you here in our classes. And that's what's really unusual and very, what we say, immersive.
And we record it.
We record it.
I think that's a big thing. I know in medical school, when we were sitting in with patients, they would record it, then you get to review it. Because a lot of times you're injecting and a trainer's going, oh yeah, move it here, do this. And you're like, and you're like a little robot. And it really doesn't sink in on why you did it. So when you go back and review your recordings on why you injected it, it kind of goes, oh, okay. It can kind of relate why they were telling me to change the depth in my plane, where my needle was, and things like that. So I like the fact that, yes, we record it. You're able to rewatch it. You get to rewatch all of your peers that are at the same course and see what they did great and how they could improve and how you can improve from there. But our one-on-one training, I think, I think it's cool.
Our students love it. And if you're new to injecting, or if you've been injecting for a few years and you want to come in and fine tune some areas, or you want that little extra help, it's awesome. We're very close to you, and our students really have fun. It's a very fun day. They have more fun than they expect that they're going to have.
And keep the classes small.
Yeah.
I mean, really small. That's why we do have 3 dates. I think our February class is almost full. It's February 21st, March 20th, and May 1st are going to be our foundation classes. So register early, because they are filling up, and we do limit the classes to very, very small. So it is an intimate group of people that are really about learning and really enhancing their aesthetic outcomes.
Yeah, it's excellent. So we hope you guys want to come. It's awesome.
All right. So now that we're done with some housekeeping.
And now we get to go on to rheology. So tonight's subject is rheology. And many times we both go out and train all over the place. And I usually will go through anatomy and I'll go through rheology before I train. And the other day I had somebody who had been doing injectables for 16 years. She was a PA. I won't mention what city. But I said, okay, I'm going to talk about rheology now. Do you guys know what rheology is? And she had never heard the word rheology. And she had been injecting for 16 years. I'm sure you've had that happen before too.
We do. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, I think different people would explain it differently, and there's different understandings and different interpretations of it. So I think every time I talk about it, it kind of still opens people's eyes and helps you understand it even more when you're talking about the different components of rheology. So yeah, I mean, it definitely is important as we get even more fillers on the marketplace. I mean, ultimately, we're going to keep adding and adding and adding more fillers. And, with so many more fillers on the marketplace, how do you decide what filler to be using and for your patient and what plane you're going to be injecting it? So I think rheology is important to help you understand and help you to utilize the aspects of your filler so you're choosing the right one for your patient. So ultimately, it is very, very important. And it's not that you have to use one specific filler for here or there, but if you understand the general concept, you can use a filler anywhere and make it your own.
I agree. Knowing rheology is everything. I think it's everything. And it's how you choose the filler for your specific patient. So we want to kind of go through what is hyaluronic acid. Mm-hmm. A lot of fillers are hyaluronic acid-based fillers. It's a gel. Yep. It's a sugar. It's a polysaccharide, and it holds more than 1,000 times its weight in water. So we have it in our bodies. We have it in our skin. It's in our eyes. It's in our joints. We have it in our bodies already. So they've taken this structure and they've kind of changed it, which we'll go through in a few minutes.
They make it a gel.
They make it into a gel and they connect it together. And so just so people know that it's something that naturally occurs in the body.
So how are they made? A lot of people don't realize that it's actually a powder. And when it gets a powder, they add their water and all of their extra little things that create their brand of hyaluronic acid. You have your Galderma products, which have NASHA and expression technology. Two different types of technologies are going to be made a little bit differently. Vicross versus the Juvederm are going to be made differently. Your Bolotero is going to be made differently. So even though they're hyaluronic acids, every company has their own, it's a proprietary way of it. I think of it like people when you get wine. Ultimately, you have your grapes, you have your yeast, and you have your water. How they mix it, mash it, and do their special thing to it is their own proprietary way, and it's their secret. And what comes out of it is their specialty wine.
Right.
And so this is where it comes down to, it's their specialty HA. And so you have to understand that we will never exactly know everything about what it's entailed and how it's made, but we can tell from rheology how it potentially will react in your tissue and how it's going to play to help you get the aesthetic results that you're looking for.
So the whole way they make it, the heat, the pressure, the way it's mixed, that's all secret.
Yep.
That is all, like, if we knew, they'd probably kill us. So we don't want to know that stuff. But we do know what it's made of, hyaluronic acid molecules and chains of hyaluronic acid. We do know that it's cross-linked with something called BDDE, which is something that kind of connects the chains of hyaluronic acid together.
Yeah.
So that it's just kind of is tighter in a way. It just doesn't float around as much. It just kind of holds the chains together.
I like analogies, and so my analogy is like hyaluronic acid are the little light bulbs. If you buy a Christmas tree,
there you go. Yeah.
Lights. The little light bulbs are HAs, and when you add water to it, those little, I guess the connecting electricity that makes it one strand are the little cross-linkings for each HA. Once you add cross-linking the BDDE, it's actually taking your one strand of Christmas lights and you're connecting it to another strand of Christmas lights. So you get all these Christmas lights that kind of interconnect with each other. And how much BDDE, and it goes into we call cross-linking and the percentage of cross-linking. So out of all of those lines of Christmas lights, how much of them are actually connected to each other?
Right. Your
NASHA products being 1%, your Galderma expression technologies between 6 to 8%. Mm-hmm. Your Vicross probably somewhere between 4 or 5%, if I remember that correctly. So everyone has their own amount of cross-linking. And so the cross-linking then determines potentially how well it holds together. On top of that, how much they entangle themselves and stuff like that, that creates their own version of an HA.
Yeah, so many people think that the amount of BDDE or cross-linking that is in a product denotes how easily it is to break down or hydrolyze. And that doesn't really correlate. Yeah. So the product, when we want to break down, to hydrolyze a HA product, or we use Hyaluronic or hyaluronidase with it, that's breaking down the hyaluronic acid, not the cross-linking.
Yes.
So what really plays into effect is how tight that cross-linking is, not really how much there is. There could be it could be cross-linked at 5% and still be really tough to break down if it's a very, very tight cross-linking. And it could be cross-linked at 7% and be a much looser cross-linking, and the hyaluronic acid be like a net.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the tightness and the type of the
hyaluronic acid,
short and long chains.
The Hyaluronic is going to break down. If we go back to the Christmas lights, each bulb is HA. The little interconnection between each bulb are the bonds, and those bonds are the ones that Hyaluronic breaks down, not the connection of one strand of light to another strand of light.
Right.
Is kind of an analogy. Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. So there is a correlation between cross-linking and the amount of hyaluronic acid or hyaluronidase that you have to use to break down, because you're more cross-linking potentially means that you have less accessibility to all the hyaluronic acid chains that are out there. And as you said, if it's mixed up more, stuff like that, tighter. We definitely know certain ones like Vicross, much, much tighter, which they talk about a lot more, that they are much more heavily tighter cross-linked in a sense. You're going to get things where I say it's going to be more like a gobstopper, like a jawbreaker. When, the kiddo, you add hyaluronidase to it, it literally can only break down the surface, and that's why you have to do a couple of treatments to keep breaking it down.
So that's why you need to know your products that you're injecting, because if you have something that is almost like a jawbreaker to break down, if you get that product into an artery, it might be really, really hard to break down. And it might take a long time to do it. So
you
need to know your products. Yep. Yeah, you need to know something that's very easy to break down, that's 1% cross-linked, versus something that's very tightly or a higher amount of cross-linking.
No,
you need to know what you're injecting and how fast you can break it down. So fillers have different concentrations of hyaluronic acid.
This is one of your rheology things. Yep. So the concentration. That definitely dictates how much fluff, I could say, that you're gonna get. You have your Juvederm, like ultra pluses are gonna be 24 milligrams, so that's why it likes to fluff up a little bit more. I kind of find that 20 milligrams of HA seems to be, you say, more net neutral-y in a sense. It holds on to some water, doesn't overly fluff. But, I think that if you look at it across the board, if it's 20 milligrams of hyaluronic acid, whichever filler you're using, you're probably a little bit more net neutral within some certain range, give or take. But as you get more higher concentrations, you're probably going to have more pull-in of water after it's settled in place. If you have less than 20, you're probably not going to have as much water pull-in. Into the area.
So like we said earlier, that hyaluronic acids they're like water magnets. Hyaluronic acid is a water magnet, and it'll pull over 1,000 times its weight in water to itself. So at 20, like Dr. Kwok was saying, at 20, it's pretty neutral. It'll pull water in and get softer, but not necessarily get bigger. When you have something that has a higher hyaluronic acid content, i.e. Juvederm Ultra Plus that are in the 23s, if you have more hyaluronic acid, it'll pull water into it, and then it will kind of expand like a sponge. It'll expand. So that's why people love that stuff in the lips, because it has a tendency to fluff and stay fluffy. Yeah. So there's different uses.
We definitely knew that. Yeah. I mean, when we first started injecting under eyes, we were like, Juvederm looks great underneath
For a
here.
while.
We would fill it, and you'd fill it in right to where it looked beautiful when they walked out, and then they come back in a couple of weeks, and they're like puffy. And you're like, ooh, what happened? Now that you understand, has more higher concentration of HA, if you are using Juvederm Ultra Plus in the area, it's not that you can't. We're not saying that you can't. You just have to keep in mind that, I may need to fill that in maybe at up to 70%, knowing that it's going to pull in water over the next couple of weeks and it's going to settle with a little bit more of a fluffiness to it. So this is helping you guys understand that you can use products anywhere as long as you understand the consequences of the rheology and how it's going to play into the tissue.
Exactly. So if you undercorrect with something that's going to fluff up, you might be spot on.
Yeah.
You might not be spot on. So we talked about the cross-linking, how cross-linking is a little bit different. So if you think about cross-linking, sometimes we can get it, if you picture it as a fishing net. Sometimes I picture it as a fishing net. So if something is, say, 4% cross-linked, it's only going to have a few ropes on the fishing net. So when you catch fish, it's going to stretch. So like the products like the Refine Define, those products that are stretchy, Juvederm Ultra Plus, they're stretchy.
Yep.
So if you have a lower cross-linking, it'll stretch more. If you have more cross-linking, it just won't stretch as much. So it won't be as flexible.
So a little tighter net.
So the more cross-linking, the less that net will stretch, holding the same amount of fish. So that might kind of help you understand the cross-linking. But there's another thing called G prime.
Yep.
So explain G prime for everybody.
G prime is the amount to me of lifting capacity that AHA has. And, a lot of these values that you get are definitely in the laboratory setting. They're not typically, something where it's a real life evaluation in tissue. But G prime in the laboratory is when they actually take the filler and they put pressure on it. And then where that pressure starts to deform the product is kind of that G prime. It's the kind of the lifting capacity of your filler, which I think is one of the more important ones for me because I like to inject onto the periosteum a lot to mimic more bone, to mimic more deep fat, to give that projection out for my patients. So I'm always using a lot more higher G prime.
Yeah.
I think it's more of my favorite one to kind of really, really use.
I probably use twice as much of high G prime than I do of low G prime.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think because a lot of the stuff that we need to do is lifting and building volume and lifting that up. So I always say building your cake, baking your cake. So it takes more batter to put in there to bake a cake than it does to frost it.
Yep.
So a lot of the stuff that we use for frosting or for superficial is a lower G prime.
Right.
And that could be anywhere from the Bellatero to the Refine to Define to Velour. Any of those are in that lower G prime. And those you can use to frost and kind of smooth things out. But you need a firmer product to do your arm work for you, to do your lifting for you.
True. Very, very true. Next, viscosity, elasticity. Those are very important. How thick your product is, how much stretchability it has. Those tend to play into different tissue layers, how it's going to play in the different layers. Are you going to use something more viscous? Are you going to use something a little bit more elastic? I like the elastic ones more on superficial because if you're placing it above the muscle, your muscle is going to be moving. So this is for your subcutaneous planes. If you're placing it above a muscle, the muscle is going to move and stretch with expression. You want a little bit more elastic type of a product so that it's not going to bunch up and be more solid type of product. That's when you see the whole tissue kind of push and move up because the muscle contracts. Well, the filler kind of bunches up in a sense. If you're using a product that has a lot more elasticity, when the muscle stretches or contracts, it's going to kind of flow with it in a much more natural way.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's one thing that you need to know is, does this product stretch before I go and I choose it to put in a patient? So when you see your patient, you're like, okay, do I need to put something in the cheeks to lift their cheeks? Okay, do I need something that stretches or do I need something that lifts? So if I need something that lifts, I'm going to go for a higher rheology, or a higher G prime. So I'm going to go for something firmer. If I'm going to put something in nasolabial folds, lips, marionette lines, does this area move? It moves all the time because we talk all the time. So we need something that stretches. We need something that moves. So I'm going to go and pick my stretchier products for that area. Do I want a stretchier product that absorbs water and fluffs later, or do I want a stretchy product that stays pretty neutral? That's up to the provider. So, but just know kind of what the product is. What is that product? You pick your product according to your patient's needs.
Exactly. And that's honestly, that's the biggest thing. You pick it based off your patient's needs and what you can get out of your filler. I mean, I can take any filler and inject it wherever I want, really, as long as you understand the rheology of it. You know, will I inject Restylane Refine onto the bone into an area?
You can.
It
won't show.
I mean, with enough filler, it will show. I mean, you can make it happen. You know, will I inject the Restylane Lift superficially? I can do that because I understand what the rheology is and how to mimic what I'm trying to do. I may place very tiny, tiny aliquots across that surface just to do some frosting, but I understand the characteristic of it, so I'm much more careful with it. So if you understand the rheology of your products, you can use any product pretty much anywhere. You just have to understand it and what the limitations are.
I do see providers, you probably have seen this too, where I go somewhere and they say, you know, we only buy this one product. We love it. We use it everywhere. It works everywhere. And I just know in my mind, I'm like, you don't know rheology. You don't know which products work better in some areas and some depths, and which products work better in superficial or other areas are stretchy or areas of movement. So it's so important. You can't, I mean, like, you can put the same product everywhere. Is that going to be the best outcome? No.
You need to artistry.
mimic. Yeah, you need to mimic.
I mean, I think this is where, as you get better with your artistry and your injection aesthetic results, this is where now you start to fine tune and say, you know what, I'm going to use this product in here because it's going to give me this characteristic. I'm going to use this to give this characteristic. It's kind of like when you're looking at makeup. I mean, you can buy one makeup color and paint your whole face, but you guys buy the foundation and then there's the bronzer and the highlighter and all these things that I don't even understand because you guys are trying to create artistry on there. You know, you don't just paint the face with the foundation you're outside and doing and that's
Want to make a bet? I was telling my husband the other day, I'm like, look at this girl, she's like contouring everything. I have no clue how to contour something. I would never spend that much time. There's no way.
I mean, but that's understanding like your differences of these fillers because there is a characteristical difference that's going to create a different artistry for the patient in the area. Can you use one for everything? Yeah, you can. But I think you end up being a little bit of a cop-out. It's like, oh, it works here, it works here. Well, it's kind of like that journal said, you're master of none and, you know, you just a jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that you can't do that and you can do decently well with it, but I think as you really, really hone your artistry, you really, really want to fine tune and get your patient to the best results that you can get, which I think where rheology does play in.
Absolutely. Particle size. Particle size is another interesting thing. It is actually patented by Galderma, and nobody else has particles in their products, and that's the NASHA group of the fillers. So NASHA is the non-animal stabilized hyaluronic acid, just another word for another filler. But basically, those fillers, the Lift, Restylane, and Silk, those are all particle-based. So they're all made out of particles. The Lift has a bigger particle, Restylane medium, and Silk is small, kind of like a powder. So I always say it's like boulders, rocks, and sand. Same exact product, just different size particles, which is kind of cool.
And the particle size, I think, is important because it dictates how much potential lifting you can get. I mean, if you look at a rheology chart, when we look at it later on, you know, they say Restylane Lift, have very close lifting capacity. You have to realize that's in the laboratory. That's not in real life when you're injecting a patient. There is still going to be a difference, as Lori says, like bigger boulders versus smaller rocks. Well, bigger boulders, I'm actually able to stack them up and get much more lifting than smaller rocks land on top of each other. You know, Silk supposedly has higher G prime than some of the other fillers out there, yet you don't really see as much of that because if you're pouring sand on top of each other, there's only so much sand that's going to really lift before it gets displaced because of the smaller particle size. So this is where particle size does play into the fact of all of this. Is kind of like a jigsaw, well, like a teeter-totter with many different arms to it because you have to think about it in in all different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when you're thinking about it, you're like, okay, why would we need something like silk, like little tiny powdered type particles? Why do we need something that's like a sandy kind of a particle? But when you're thinking about it, it has a higher G prime than say Refine or Bellatero.
Right.
Has a higher G prime. It's a particle. Where would we use that? A little wrinkle that's kind of deep that I need more lifting capability in a small particle to, like perioral rhytids. Awesome.
Yep.
So those small little lines that you need a higher G prime to give you more oomph to lift those little lines is perfect for something like this. So that's where kind of knowing that if it's, you don't want something soft and squishy that's not going to help lift those lines. You want something small, tiny, tiny, tiny that's going to help really give you oomph.
Yeah, if you have something that's small, tiny, superficial, and you want to blend it out and stuff like that, Bellatero can work very, very nicely into that.
Yes.
And that's just where understanding rheology gives you this whole, it really is an artistry.
Yeah.
It's an artistry of what you're trying to do. Lastly, was it presence of lidocaine? Presence of lidocaine, everything for the most part nowadays has lidocaine in it.
Bellatero doesn't. Yeah.
It just came out.
Yay.
It just got approved.
That one was the
I wish they had focused more on getting more of the Bellatero line.
The line. Yeah, we only have one.
Would have loved to play with more. So essentially, pick your dermal filler according to your patient's needs, not according to who gives you deals. Ultimately, that would be something you want to consider is, yes, there's going to be a certain one that maybe you're going to use mostly because you're going to get really consistent results with that one, and you're going to get good deals off of that one, but you should be carrying some of the other ones just so that you can play around with your artistry a little bit more.
Right. We kind of touched about lifting, contouring, skin straightening, but lifting, you want that high G prime product to lift and to revolumize and expand tissue.
And this is going to be placing it deep. You're really, really going to be focusing on the deep fat pads, bone structure in a sense, that pre-periosteal space kind of focus that to really, really give that lifting capacity. So that's kind of where you would use these ones.
So that's your cake.
Yes, that's exactly.
And then the contouring, I would say the frosting,
Yep.
is what you do on top.
Yep.
So is this going to be something softer, something more stretchy, something that's going to be appropriate that you can kind of layer it in, and it takes less product to do a little bit of that frosting on top than it used to. Then
of course
it does to cause the lift.
And this is the whole thing. What we used to do is we try to play around in this contour level, filling in hollownesses that really needed that deeper support. And what you end up doing, if you're imagining, is you're creating a fluff on top of a muscle. Yeah, it's going to fill in nicely because it's pushing the muscle down, because the muscle has to go somewhere because there's no structure or foundation underneath. Now you have this big fluff of product on top of a muscle that's being pushed down, and now the muscle wants to contract. Well, guess what? The whole amount of product that you place above starts to lift and move. And that's why you get those type of patients who look like that. So this is where you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish with your injections. Are you trying to give them that lifting, revolumizing, go down deeper, go down to the pre-periosteal space, go down into the deeper fat pads and replace that volume properly, create that right foundation. Then you can kind of create that contour, which is kind of that secondary step, is to really, really round it out because you're placing things above the muscle. If you imagine just where you're placing it, it's a visualization of it. If your muscle's moving and contracting all the time, especially in this mid-face area, you don't want to put a lot of heavy product superficially into this area, the subcutaneous area, unless you really, really have to. So, really, really think about that.
And he brings up a good point. We're talking about anatomy. I'm an anatomy freak if you know me. I think anatomy is extremely important, and I know some people beg to differ, and we might debate this on Instagram if you're watching. But I think anatomy is very important. And like Dr. Kwok was mentioning, you're going deep and you're going superficial. Where do we lose our fat pads? Deep and superficially. You need to replace it where people have lost it. So if they lose the deep fat pad, which I call the box spring, and I call the superficial fat pad the mattress. So we lose that box spring, it gets thin, and the mattress gets all sprung when we get old. So we need to get in there and we need to replace that box spring that's that deeper sub-smaz in that deep fat pad. We need to replace that first and give them their shape back, and then we can go in and replace that superficial subcutaneous fat. Now, we do get people too that have that nasal jugal groove. You've seen this. And they have pretty full cheeks already, but they have that little nasal jugal groove. And you're like, huh. So you don't want to go in there and give them bigger cheeks to make them look like a chipmunk because they have the volume already. So start looking at them and saying, you have cheek volume. You just have that little crease here. Then all you do is go in with a little cannula and you just fill you just frost it so that you help to take away that little light reflection that's happening, and you frost it. So sometimes you don't need all that lift. Look at the patient, make sure you look at their anatomy and you're respecting their anatomy. It is all about anatomy and respecting that anatomy and knowing where they were a few years ago, and we want to get them back to where they are now.
Right.
Yeah.
Next, skin strengthening. So this goes into different aspects of it. Skin strengthening can definitely be actually even your collagen stimulators.
Yeah.
You know, this bunches into it. You have your Sculptra, your PLLAs, you have your hyperdiluted radiuses. This is all about skin strengthening. But then again, there's Tom Van Eyck's technique, the ferning technique, where you can place, your HA very, very intradermally. And that trauma and that stretch in the area actually creates fibroblastic activity that actually starts to strengthen the skin and stimulate collagen. So a lot of different things that you can do with your fillers to actually strengthen skin as well.
And there's new stuff coming out for skin strengthening in the next few months. I'm just telling you. So I'm so excited about it because skin strengthening is so nice because it's really getting, when you build a collagen and some of these creases that people have, and you kind of get in there and cause those fibroblasts to grow, it's going to thicken it and won't crease as well in those areas. And it's beautiful. It takes time. It's tedious.
Anything with skin
takes time. But it's beautiful.
Yeah. Skin boosting?
Yeah.
We don't do too much of that here. I think there was a trend using, what was the little stamper thingies?
The little aqua gold.
Yes, the aqua gold.
Yeah.
You can definitely consider that. I think in Europe they have their skin boosters. I think Silk was actually a skin booster in Europe. And so that's literally tiny, nappaging the skin. So you get these tiny little boosts of hydration into that superficial intradermal type of area to get that boosting. That what it does is just pulls hydration into that superficial dermis area.
Yeah, if you think about it, in aqua gold, they would put like some neuromodulator, and they'd put some hyaluronic acid and whatever, vitamin C and whatever else you put in. And people still do it and stamp it all over the face, and it stamps that hyaluronic acid into the face and in the neuromodulators. Well, that pulls 1,000 times its weight in water to itself, so it's going to pull water to itself. So it's kind of like when you do filler in the lips. When you do it really superficially, it's going to hydrate. It's going to pull water to itself, so it hydrates the lips. So something superficial will do that.
Lastly,
all right. This is
we like this chart.
Yeah.
These are independent values. This does come from Galderma, but the values that you see, the G prime and the flexibility, is all from independent laboratories, and they just put it into a nice little chart for you. So x-axis being G prime, how much lifting capacity that you're going to get, and your y-axis being flexibility, how much flexibility does your product have. And so when you look at this kind of helps you categorize where and what type of filler you may want to use in different depths of tissue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I usually say, like, when you're looking over at the very top here with the wrestle and lift, which is this is the firmest, and you come down to the softest, and you come over to the stretchiest. When you go over to the stretchiest one on your right-hand side, those are the thinnest, lightest products. And I always say when you put your needle in the skin and you tent it, make sure you have like a sheet over your needle, just a sheet of tissue. And when you get over to the middle part where you have the 600 to 1,000 as far as the flexibility, when you get to the middle part, then those are the areas where when you tent your needle, make sure you have like a blanket over your needle. Make sure you have a blanket where you can, that's kind of the depth you want it. And then when you get over to the far right and you've got the products that are high or firmer, then you need more like a down comforter over your needle. So you need to hide it under more tissue.
No, exactly. I definitely, you look at Restylane Lift, Restylane, it has high G prime. So those are ones you're going to play a lot more, probably down on the periosteum, that's going to give you that lifting capacity. I honestly think Restylane Lift has been taught incorrectly how to be injected. That's for another time. I think all these perpendicular injections with people pushing on it literally just negates what Lift is trying to do, especially since it's a particulate gel. I think it needs to be injected at more of an angle, just FYI. And therefore, you're going to get actually much more lifting. I think a lot of people mistaken lift as not being able to get as much lifting capacity, but actually find that you can get even more so if injected injected correctly. So, I think we have to do probably a nice little webinar and just kind of an injection, I don't know, technique or what. I mean,
there's so many different techniques now, and there's so much research that's come out, perpendicular versus having a lower angle of injection.
Yeah, but just like the imagination of what's going on when you're injecting, where's your product going? I don't think anybody really talks about actually imagining where your product's actually fluffing. We talk a little bit about it, but most people just talk like, oh, your filler's here, we inject here, and this is it. I think maybe we'll do another talk on that.
My mind's going right now. I'm thinking of like how we can visually.
There needs to be a visualization because I always visualize what I'm doing with these fillers as I'm injecting. But going back to this chart, wrestling lift, it's going to give you a lot of lifting capacity, and that's why I do love that one, because it really does give the capacity for that.
And a lot of people like to use Voluma. To do a lifting, but if you look at it, it's in the middle. It's kind of in the middle.
It's more of a gel. I mean, I think that you can get to me, as far as it being an artist, I think that precision is much more important. I think because it is a particulate, and why I like the wrestling, because it is a particulate nature, I actually get a little bit more specific precision on the lifting I want in the specific area I want. I think when you get into the gel aspects of it, whether it's Voluma or Define that I'm using, it gives you a little bit more of a softer fluff because it's a gel. So you can be a little bit less specific and just randomly inject, and that gel kind of amorphously kind of just globs right into the area. Versus wrestling lift is much more precise because it's particulate. You kind of need to push it to the area that you want it to get that lifting capacity. So there is a visualization as far as, in my mind, of why these products work differently and how I'm going to utilize it to my advantage for my artistry.
I think that's such a good point, that when you're injecting, you need to visualize what's in there anatomically, what plane you're in, where is that needle. You need to have your smart hand feeling where that tip of that needle is.
But and then you need where the product is going.
Visualizing where's the product coming out? Where's my bevel? Where's my port? Where is that product coming out? Because I will frequently, turn the port around backwards and have it. I want it to squirt out towards the piriform fossa, or just know what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's so important.
Yeah, I mean, cannulas, for example, I think, when people are using a lot more cannula, I find that it is definitely a lot less precise. I think when I'm filling it in an area that I don't need to be precise, it works beautifully, but being precise about it, people talk about it, but you have to realize it's not like a needle where your product is coming out from the front of the actual needle.
Right.
Your product is actually coming out from the side. And depending what cannula you use, like the TSKs, at least they're much closer to the tip versus your Dermafill and your soft fills are actually a couple of millimeters off to the side. You'll see people come in and they're like, oh, yep, this is my tip of my cannula. And they're like, I'm starting to fill. And you're like, well, your actual hole is a couple of millimeters behind that. So you're actually not filling in right exactly where you want it to go. And you have to take that in consideration. Even with needles, I see a lot of people when they're injecting, they're like, okay, I want it to fill right here to right in here, and we'll stick it in there. And they get to the tip right where you want it to do. And what do? They start moving before they push product. Well, no wonder why they get a ledge. Yeah. They actually should be starting further up. And as they're pushing product, that product is now filling in where they actually want it to fill. And so these are the things you need to be thinking about when you're injecting. And I think people miss that because nobody talks about it and nobody challenges people to really do it. So you end up seeing people constantly poking people, like trying to blend and fill all this stuff. And you're just like, why are you doing that? If you actually had more intention, more purpose, really thinking about where your needle is going, what you're trying to do with it, you wouldn't be poking your patient as often.
Yeah, exactly. So, I agree. We need a webinar on coordinating injections. The coordination of injection.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Alrighty. So I think we're done with that.
We are. Okay.
So we're gonna answer some questions if you guys do have questions.
Do send in some questions because we want to make this interactive. We want to do it with you guys.
And if we don't get it, definitely send us at our email, learn@theaestheticimmersion.com, and we'll try and answer those questions for you. But we're going to...
So we're trying to get the questions up so we can see them, or else someone's going to read us any questions that you're typing in that we can answer. And anything else? Blending. We were going to talk about blending. We didn't bring that up. Do you blend?
I don't.
I don't either, so never mind.
I personally don't believe in blending. And I think you're one that's like, these companies spend millions and millions and millions of dollars doing these studies.
Rheological studies,
and you just added water and you just like...
screwed up the whole thing.
And when you blend, my biggest thing is when you're mixing it, how do you know you mixed it up properly, that you're not getting more HA in this 0.1 versus water in this 0.1, and that consistency. So you're going to get it, to me, an unevenness-ish in the way the product lays once the water's gone out of the area.
Yeah, exactly. And my thought is this: you're going to throw normal saline into it or lidocaine, whatever you blend it with. So you blend, and I know lots of really good injectors blend. It's whatever. So you throw your liquid in there with your product. It's not going to absorb right away. The hyaluronic acid is going to take a few hours to absorb. So it's not going to absorb right away. So you've got your hyaluronic acid filler and your liquid. Yeah. You're going to inject it. It still isn't going to absorb into the hyaluronic acid particles that quickly. So the liquid, you're going to see the liquid and the hyaluronic acid wherever you've injected it.
Right.
It might look good for a little while. The saline or the water is going to absorb much more quickly, and your hyaluronic acid will stay. So you're going to have a deficit more quickly in that filler. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
And I definitely seen that, because I actually tried to do a little bit of blending actually when I was doing the A-frame. And I definitely noticed when it settled down that there was some slight, to me, being OCD, some slight little deficits. And maybe it's my technique. I didn't place it as well evenly into the area. But it could have been just, it looked smooth when I left her. And then when she came back a couple weeks later, I was like, I just need to feel a little bit more into this. So could have just been kind of the blending of it. Yeah. Or it could have been technique of what I'm doing. I can see there are going to be certain areas that maybe you really want to thin out your product even more than the hyaluronic acid of 20 milligrams. You want to make it maybe like 10 milligrams, because like this area, the A-frame, like you really, really want to be really, 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 really thin in the area. But for the most part, everywhere else, I personally don't see why there's a necessary need to blend. Yeah. Even in foreheads, when I do foreheads, I use full strength, and I use wrestling, lift into their full strength.
I did not hear that.
Yeah, you did.
I didn't hear that.
But ultimately, I personally just don't find it necessary to blend, given that there are many different fillers on the marketplace, and you can pick and choose what you want to use.
And it's so reproducible, and it's so dependable.
Yeah.
I know how it's going to interact. When you pick a filler that you used for quite a while off the shelf, you know how it's going to interact in tissue, in the depth of your tissue you're using, what patient you've chosen, how thick their tissue. You know how it's going to interact. So I just think throwing another variable into there is just something I don't choose to do. Right. We did have a question about thank you for your questions. Keep them coming in, you guys. A question about, can you put Volbella and the Juvederm products into the lips, similar to the Kiss, using the Julie Horn or the fence post technique. You can, but that technique is a very advanced technique. And say Volbella is super thin and super light. That's one that would be much more subtle in the lip. And when you're that superficial in the submucosal aspect of the lip, you're above the muscle, you're not in the muscle. So you don't have the ability to hide any lumps or bumps when you're doing that technique. Yep. So that technique is going to be much more advanced. You're going to do very, very thin little posts. Mm-hmm. And Volbella would work really well for that. Juvederm Ultra, I've done that before with the fence post technique, but you've got to be very, very light on your thumb pressure. It's almost like you're just painting a little layer in. Yep. Otherwise, you could really get lumps with it, because that product has a little higher G prime. Yep. And it fluffs up later. So it might look really good now, and then in a week they got these lumps because they fluffed up. Yeah. So just be really, really careful.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I definitely have tried it I played with both of them. I would say, I think there is a characteristical difference with the rheology of Kiss, and why I find that it really can really pull it in really nicely and give the nicer definition. I like with Juvederm, I never got as strong of a definition.
I didn't either.
In that, because it ended up looking more fluffier. Because of the characteristics. Volbella, I personally just don't use very much because it is on the lighter side. I mean, at 15 milligrams, is it 16? 15 milligrams of hyaluronic acid? I mean, it really
15,
is
17.
very light, or 17 and a half maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's 17 and a half. It's really, really much lighter in that sense. So I wouldn't know exactly how that would play out.
Well, I mean, it's going to be less, so it's not going to suck water out of the lips, you know, so it'll be neutral, so it won't fluff up. Like none of the Vicross fluffs up. None of the Vicross products fluff up.
Yeah.
Right. That ain't happening. So one of the Vicross products, they don't fluff up. They're the ones that are very tightly cross-linked.
Yeah.
But if you don't get them in the muscle, you know, you get it superficial to the muscle, like the Volbella, I would think it would be nice. I haven't used it in the Julie Horn technique or the posting, but I think it would be nice.
Mike, what is our favorite technique for lip fillers? Definitely, it's Julie Horn. I do a modified.
I do too. I
do a modified. I actually kind of combine Julie's with Tom Van Eyck's slightly. I kind of come in at not just vertically, but you can come in at angles. I think it really just depends on what your artistry and how you're trying to flip the lip open. In a sense. So
and I use a lot of the verticals medially.
Yep.
Maybe 2 or 3, 4 little verticals, and then a lot of times I will either come out this way and do like a little chicken foot, or sometimes I come up this way. Sometimes I go in this way and do a little chicken foot, you know, on the bottom lip. Sometimes I'll do, if I want to flip that lip out and give it a little bit bigger lip, I'll do the fence post.
Yep.
So really it's patient dependent. It's kind of whatever you want that outcome to be for that lip. And if you want to flip it out more and you want more volume, do the little fence post technique. If you just want to accentuate their little vermilion bodies on the bottom, you can just do the little chicken foot. So it really, you can do both. You can do whatever you want. Just stay submucosal. We don't go down into the muscle anymore.
Yep.
We try not to. We try not to go below the muscle.
It's not that you can't.
Try not to.
Try not to. I mean, there's certain instances where I will, because I really want to push that lip out a little bit more, but those are rarer instances. And if you are going to be injecting there, then you just need to make sure that you probably aspirate so that you're not in a blood vessel or anything.
Yeah,
like
just
that.
know the arteries are in and below that muscle.
So
you know, I think, you know, staying superficial, you have less bruising and such, but
it's just one of those things, you know, take it with a caution. It's, you know, I would say there is, in my book, there is no man's land of injecting. I think that it's up to you to decide what you want to do. There's going to be majority of areas that are going to be common places to be injecting, and then the other areas are going to be like, I need to have a specific reason for injecting in that area.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Carrie, what do you think about blending? Does this disrupt the rheology? Definitely. I think it does disrupt the rheology. I don't think you get what you're trying to get out of your filler when you do blend. I think there's some rare occasions, as I said, where I will blend, but for the most part, I like to use the filler as it is. I mean, it's made that way. You know, ultimately, if you look at it, to me, like even the Vicross products, from Voluma to Velour to Volbella, they're actually doing a dilutional effect. I don't think they've changed the actual HA molecule and the tightness of it. All they've done is change the HA concentration in it. So I actually think it's a dilution of itself. But the thing is that dilutional effect actually is done in their own laboratory, in their own, you know, facility. So it's going to be more cohesive, more what they're looking for as far as a cohesive product coming out of the filler. Versus when you're blending it in your own office, unless you sit there and really, 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 really blend it and you really get that HA and the water to blend nicely, you're going to have certain areas that are a little bit more HAs, a little bit more water, a lot of differences between 0.1 to 0.1 to 0.1.
Agree. Jamie mentioned, are you seeing product migration from the lip tinting technique? That's a good question, Jamie. Thank you. Actually, I haven't seen any migration from the lip tinting technique, but I know it has been seen. I think the technique is that you really need to make sure you get, when your needle, when you introduce your needle into the vermilion border, it needs to be inside of the vermilion border,
Yes.
not in the white roll. It needs to be just inside of in the pink. So don't introduce it distal or
If you start
outside of that
injecting it
vermilion border.
further back, then yes, you're going to get kind of that migration effect because you're not actually in the vermilion. Because the whole purpose of it is when you're in that vermilion, as you're coming out, the product as it hits that vermilion actually spreads within the vermilion border itself. So if you're behind it and you miss it and you're coming through the vermilion into the tissue above it, then you're going to both get this fullness up above, and it's going to look like migrated filler.
Yeah, so, we're dissolving a lot of fillers nowadays that have migrated into the ergotroid. So it might be technique driven, it might be product. It could be a blend of both. I mean, years ago we injected deeper. We weren't thinking about doing it submucosally. So who knows? Maybe that was part of why it migrated. Maybe it had to do with rheology of the filler. We see it a lot with Juvederm. So Juvederm's getting the name of Moviderm. Yeah. Okay, I don't know if I want to slam Juvederm or not because really that's what all lips were done with was Juvederm.
And at the end of the day,
of course
the more you stuff into an area that's limited, I think we definitely went into that trend where it's just like bigger is better. And
it's got to go somewhere.
It goes somewhere. And remember, all of our fillers, and this is probably for another talk, is fillers last a long time. Don't take this whole FDA thing like it'll last 12 months, last 18 months. All of your fillers last a long time. If you start really researching into it, the fillers are lasting years and years into this. And we noticed this when we were injecting. I used to inject Restylane underneath the eyes, and 5 years later, my patient came back and it's still there. Yeah. It's looking really nice. Maybe they need a little top off, but ultimately, all of the white papers from all of the companies show a subjective value of when it's disappeared, and they're going from a grade 4 level to a grade 2 improvement, blah, blah, blah. All it is an independent physician going, oh yeah, they look like the nasolabial folds back. And then the patient looking at themselves, yeah, my nasolabial folds back. So it really doesn't have to necessarily do with the filler disappearing because they didn't take in consideration, they could not take the confounding factor of aging out of the research.
Right.
Who's to say that year was because they aged rather than the actual filler disappearing because they did not do any biopsy results. So ultimately, you guys have to understand these fillers last a long time. Don't get sold on, oh, this filler lasts 18 months. This filler lasts 12 months. BS. I will call that out BS because fillers have to do with expectation. My biggest analogy with that is you're going to have your patient who comes in and is like, I want it to last this long. Well, if they're the type that literally sees white hair and 1 millimeter of white hair and they're freaking out, running to the hair salon going, you need to fill this up. Well, that's going to be your patient that you're going to see every 3 to 6 months because they're never going to be happy with just that little bit. They need to be at 100%. And then your patient who waits until they're 2 inches of white hair before they deal with it, that's the patient that maybe 2 years, 3 years before they come back and do something.
So in studies from Europe, we've seen that fillers, hyaluronic acid fillers, have been there from 2 to 6 years and sometimes even 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
So they don't go away as quick as, so you don't need to tell your patients they're gone and, it'll last a year. No, I tell people, well, it depends on your body, how quickly you break it down. And, we like to look at you every 6 months. We'll just take a peek at it every 6 months, but you might not need anything. And it could last for a year, could last for 6. We don't know.
Yep.
So, yeah. So what do you think about Kiss? Do you find that it lumps a lot? Kiss is something that I think it's soft. It's a very soft, small particle gel. It's cross-linked at 7%. It's probably the perfect one for lips. Love it, love it, love it. But it does take a little while to learn. If you're using a very superficial technique, you need to be really careful because you have to remember, okay, this is has a little more oomph to it. It's stretchy. It's a perfect filler for lips.
Yep.
But if you're doing the fence post technique, you have to be really careful about the technique.
Yes.
So you make sure you inject behind that wet dry border and you don't inject too much down low, and you just have to be careful and you won't get lumps.
Unfortunately, I think lumping is unfortunately more of a technique dependent
It's a technique.
thing.
It's a learning curve.
It is a learning curve. Best way to practice is I tell you, get a syringe from your rep and practice putting strands on the back of your hand and watching how well you actually are able to create a nice long line of strand that's thin, that's consistent. Most of the times you'll find that it actually lumps up, lump and thread. That will tell you, okay, that's my technique and I need to work on that a little bit more so.
Yeah. So Anne was asking us, do we recommend a high G prime filler for chin augmentation? So we go back to our conversation where what are we trying to mimic when we're doing chin augmentations? Are we trying to mimic soft tissue or are we trying to mimic hard tissue like bone? We're trying to mimic hard tissue, right? So pick a G prime filler that is the closest to the tissue that you're trying to mimic, which is bone. So it's going to be radius, it's going to be lift, it's going to be something that's going to be a high G prime that's going to give you lots of lift and it's going to mimic the bone the best.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite for chin jawlines, if you're not afraid of it, radius.
I'm afraid of it.
I really love radius in that area. If I choose an HA, I think, lift probably would be my second one to go. I think voluma's fine in those areas as well. Define could potentially work very well. I think voluma and define probably kind of in that same category. Gives some lifting, gives a little bit more fluff than I personally like. I like a little bit more strength and a little bit more of that structure. So I'm definitely much more, for me, a radius guy if I needed to. I definitely like it.
You brought up a good point. So like I say, you pick your product according to your patient. So if your patient has very, very thin face and not much fatty tissue at all, would I pick radius, or which I don't particularly use that, but would I pick a super high G prime product, or would I pick a more the middle of the road to shape them? Because if they don't have much fatty tissue, you might pick something softer to kind of, so they won't look so much like a Maleficent or so much like so sharp. So something softer might be a good idea.
Yeah. All right, they're telling us that we need to wrap this up.
Oh, this went fast, you guys.
I know. Ask your questions, send us emails, but we're going to talk about our giveaway. This is our fun giveaway for us for 2021, right?
It is. We have a giveaway, and one of you guys, is going to win a preceptorship or a shadow day with us in our clinics. So it's going to be.
She's her.
No, he's so fun to be around. So you guys, whoever you want to pick, what you're going to need to be doing is it's going to be from February 1st now to the 28th.
End of the month.
There's going to be one winner. You're going to win a whole day with us in our clinic, one of the days that we're working. And what you need to do is follow us at The Aesthetic Immersion, which is on Instagram. So at The Aesthetic Immersion, tag 2 friends in the contest post.
That would be interested in potentially doing it.
Yeah, that would be interested in it. So providers, hopefully. Email learn@theaestheticimmersion.com. So learn@theaestheticimmersion.com. So email us, our staff, and say in a paragraph, just a short paragraph, what you want to learn from us, what you expect to gain, how many years of experience have you got, and who do you want to shadow? Who do you want to shadow?
Shadow Lori.
But I mean, email. So just let us know how much. What do you think you gain to learn? How much you want to do it? How long you've been experienced in aesthetics, and who you want to shadow. Yep. So we're going to announce the winner on the 2nd of March, which is our next AI Live. Yeah, yep. So it'll be kind of fun. Yeah.
So hopefully you guys learned a lot. We'll try and answer more questions on Instagram maybe. We'll get, if you guys are emailing us at learn@theaestheticimmersion.com, we're going to try and do little videos answering some of the questions that you've given us. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for joining us, you guys. We love doing this with you. See you later.